Hello YouTube. I've tried filming this video about 3 times. Twice people came home. Once my computer shut off because it doesn't give me a warning when my battery's too low anymore. But here's the video. And this one, I really wish I could have filmed it a while ago because what I'm going to talk about is something that happened a few months ago. And this is specifically about Leelah and Zander, because that's what I've heard the most about. There's a few other people that have died by suicide too, but I don't know much about them, so I can't really talk about them. Sorry, I'm just gonna move this camera. Okay, now you can see me. I like to talk with my hands. But about Leelah I heard the most about, just because she exploded on Instagram, she exploded on Tumblr, and I wasn't very active on Twitter, and I don't have a Facebook, so I can't say about that, but she was also talked about quite a bit on YouTube, and it was incredibly sad what happened to her. It was very shocking, very sudden, and something that wasn't entirely expected. Because everyone was still talking about Ferguson and all this other stuff with police brutality, and then suddenly it was Leelah. And now there's a lot of stuff about trans kids and transgender rights. And this was all kind of sparked a little bit by Leelah. I mean, there was stuff going on beforehand, but then Leelah just kind of made it really big. And that was because of her final wish to have transgender be taught. To have gender be taught. And not just strictly male and female. Because I haven't taken a health class personally, but living in a Republican state, I'm pretty sure they will never tell us that intersex exists. And if I were to ask a teacher, they would probably not know. And what I find so incredibly sad about what happened to Leelah was just the reality of it. About how her parents were treating her, and I knew stuff like that happened, but it was still just kind of like they get a GoFundMe and a Kickstarter, and then they end up living a great life. And with Leelah, it was something where it was just ended in death. She just killed herself, and that was it. And there was no GoFundMe, there was no plea for help. Her pleas for help were on her Tumblr, where she was posting depressing pictures. And that was kind of why I didn't go through it, because that isn't the kind of content I like to look at. Because I've looked at that before, and that was just really harmful to me. So I don't want to be looking at that. And very often. So I wouldn't really want to go through an entire blog that has a bunch of that. And the whole thing with Leelah, she was 17. She was a year away from being able to move out and just live her life. She could have gone and ended those therapy sessions. She could have gone and started new therapy sessions with a therapist, a gender therapist, and been able to say, this is what's been happening to me, because a gender therapist is still a therapist, and they can be there to talk to you. So, it was just, I find it really horrible what happened, and I know it's usually a lot harder for trans women, from what I've heard, because one, it's the abundance of transgender people are trans women, and and also the whole gender stereotype with men. It's such a taboo to be feminine, and if you are feminine, the first thought is gay, and that just makes it so much harder, because even with Leelah's parents, they were very religious, and I know with my parents, if my brother was at all feminine, then they would have never let him. They would have made sure that that was out of him, And most of them probably just by the Bible and stuff, because they're also religious, but they wouldn't have stood for it. They would have just told him, no, this isn't what's going to happen. There would have just been a few things where it's like, okay, well, we'll do this because it's not like it's something bad, but still, like, even with my very religious parents that are also conservative, I they still see it as girls can be masculine, but boys can't be feminine. And they still draw a line with masculinity for girls, like, you can't look like a boy. And just with Leelah, it was so incredibly hard. It was so incredibly horrible for her. And the fact that her parents were just so horrible. I mean, I heard a lot about Leelah just because of how it exploded everywhere. And her parents were absolutely horrible. And they never even bothered to say that they regret what they did. And I think that it would take many years and a lot of people coming to them saying that what they did was horrible for them to realize that what they did was abuse. They sent their child to an abusive therapy, and then they wonder why she killed herself. They wonder why she couldn't be a good Christian boy. And she never really was. She just didn't know that she couldn't be. And the same thing happens for a lot of trans people. They just don't know they can be. They don't know that they can be feminine or that they can be masculine. And it's so incredibly hard for her. It was so horrible that she killed herself a year before she could have done everything herself. She might have even had less than a year left. I don't even know. Like, if she needed help, she could have gone to people and say, hey, I'm not allowed to stay with my parents, or my parents have a toxic household, and people would have said, hey, you can just come over and stay at my house. Because a lot of that, because people do that quite a lot. And it was horrible. This video is longer than I meant it to be, and I kind of changed. Last time I filmed it, I ended up almost crying because it really does hit me. It's absolutely horrible what happened. And I read her suicide note. It was horrible. It's horrible what happened to her. And I feel so horrible for her. And then just a few months after that, Zander killed himself. And with Zander, there was a lot more to him. In his entire suicide note, I found it to be very similar to myself. The whole tone of it, his interests, his sexuality, it was very similar to me. And that actually did get a few people worried that I was going to follow in suit with him and kill myself, but some people do that. I wouldn't. Because I just wouldn't kill myself because of someone else. But everything that happened was horrible, and his mother was absolutely horrible, just being that abusive mother, and he had to still take care of her. I couldn't imagine having an abusive mother who made me take care of her. I would never be able to feel safe. I would never be able to feel happy. All I would ever feel was fear and anger. And even in their death, their parents couldn't recognize who they were. If I had a kid who never told me that they were trans or they were non-binary, something like that, and they end up killing themselves, and in that note they said that they were, I would fully acknowledge that. And I I don't know. That would just be if they never told me. Because I would never ignore my kid. I would never make them stay unhappy. Because I made another video about this, the role of a parent. The role of a parent is to create a happy, healthy individual who can survive in the real world. Obviously, these parents weren't doing their job if their kids killed themselves because they were not happy. They were not healthy mentally. And they were not prepared for the real world if their problems were solved, if they solved their problems through suicide. And that means that the parents failed in every aspect. And it's just absolutely horrible. And then even how people were treating Zander. And I was mostly just going on to Instagram and Tumblr because that's my two main things. And Leelah blew up. Everyone was just like, rest in power, Leelah. Rest in peace, Leelah. Everyone was making fan art. She was what everyone was talking about. People were saying, I met her, this is what she was like, I feel so bad for her. People were shutting down any hate blogs. And with Zander, it was a very quiet sort of death. It was just kind of like, Zander's gone. That was it. It was kind of just something where people were saying trans kids are now killing themselves. It's not just one. We now have 2 that have killed themselves. And listed their suicide notes online. And there's been a few more, but I have no idea who they are. And, well, I've just read about them a few times, so I don't remember their names. I don't know what was going on with them. With Zander, I read his note. And like I said, it was very eerie. And I think that one of the saddest parts compared to Leelah was that people just found Zander as something to pair along. It was like, rest in power, Leelah, rest in power, Zander. Like, he was just tagging along to Leelah. Because people still just cared incredibly about Leelah. She even blew up over YouTube, but I'm not even sure how many people know about Zander. Like, I could mention Zander to someone and they would say, who? Even though they could have just been talking for weeks about Leelah. And I find that incredibly sad. And the only mentions I ever saw of Zander were, we should talk about Zander. That was it. Unless if he was the tag along to Leelah. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, that Leelah was bad, but I just find that so incredibly sad that even Tumblr with their whole we need rights for everyone doesn't see men as getting rights unless if they're breaking the gender binary or they're gay. And I find that just incredibly sad with Tumblr. And just with their parents. The parents were, I do not blame the parents for the kids' suicide because the kids killed themselves. No one killed them. But I blame the parents for letting it happen because they did not provide a happy, healthy environment where the child could be independent. They provided an environment that was forcing a kid. And I know that with some parents, specifically Leelah's parent, specifically the situation I know of with Leelah's parents, sometimes parents just hold on to the idea of the child that they had. And for Leelah's parents, it was holding on to the idea of their son. But they didn't have that. And they never got to the point where they could accept the reality because they're just not that kind of person. And there's different ways of dealing with holding on to the idea. They didn't deal with that right. They didn't create a happy, healthy, independent individual. They did not do their job as parents. What they did do was try to fulfill their loving God and what they thought that he wanted. And I don't even... No loving God would tell a parent to do what Leelah's parents did. no loving God would ever do that. A loving God would condemn them, would bring them to the worst pits of hell. Because a loving God would see that they were absolutely horrible to one of his own creations, and a loving God would act as a parent should and make sure that child knows never to do that. Because a loving God would have never let it go that far. And whatever loving God they were praising was not the right loving God. It was not a God. Because a loving God would have never told them to do that. And I don't even have words for how horrible that is, for how horrible everyone was with Zander, for how horrible everyone was with the whole situation of Zander and Leelah. So people were so supportive of Leelah. People weren't supportive of Zander because he was a man. And with Leelah, how some people were so horrible to her. With all these hate blogs and people saying that it was a good thing she died. It was not. And I hope that her dying wish is fulfilled, because that's what she deserves. And I hope that that wherever she is now, in heaven or in another realm of it, I hope that where she is in heaven, she can see that her life had meaning, that she had meaning, that she was not just someone who ended up dying, that she was not just an abused child who could never be a woman. And I hate when people say that she was a woman, because she was a girl. She was 17 years old. She was a girl. She was not a woman. She was still a child, just like Zander. Zander was 15 years old. He wasn't a man. He was a boy. So we aren't talking about adults that died. We're talking about kids. That's just kind of what I have to say. If you notice me getting emotional, it's, like I said, it just really did hit emotionally. And I'm sorry this was so long. It was... finally got it recorded. So... to Zander, rest in power, rest in peace, and I hope that everything you ever wanted to have come from your death becomes. And to Leelah, the same to you. Rest in power, rest in peace, and may your dying wish be fulfilled. And may everyone remember you as Leelah Alcorn, and Zander, may everyone remember you as Zander. Because that's who you were. That's who you both were.